Did you know that every day in America, 2,300 people are reported as missing? Oh, wow, look at that. Mood lighting. It's all good. That's fine. It's all good. They just went away. I can't see you. 2,300 people go missing every day. Some are displaced people, of course, like after hurricanes or tornadoes, as we've been seeing. You're back, as we have seen recently. Or somebody with Alzheimer's wanders off. Teenagers tired of the abuse, tired of the situation in which they find themselves, flee, supposing for a fresh start. Some people fake their deaths, while other people's lives are ended with criminal intent. There's a military category, of course, missing in action. And there are famous missing persons, of course. Can you think of any? I heard Earhart and some other something. Jimmy Hoffa. There, I was going to figure that somebody was going to say Jimmy Hoffa. We kind of have an idea of maybe what happened to Jimmy Hoffa. We're not exactly sure what happened to Amelia Earhart or where she might be. But one spring, associated with the Passover, the time when Jesus was 12 years old, he and his parents went down to Jerusalem, as was their custom. And on the way back, Jesus became a missing person. That set in motion, of course, not a tragedy, because we know how it turns out, but a teachable moment about the mystery of God in Christ, and one of the few, probably the only true moment of Jesus' adolescent years, and one of the few moments of his childhood. What are you going to be when you grow up? That's what my kids got asked by grandparents over Christmas. What are you going to be when you grow up? Well, they're not 12, they're 17 and 18, and various amounts of shrugging that went on. But at 12 years old, did you know what you wanted to be? Did anybody grow up to be what they wanted to be when they were 12 years old? Some people do. Fireman, police officer, an astronaut, garbage collector, maybe president. One of the others two. I'm not sure which one I want to do. But it's a pivotal year, isn't it? That 12 years old, they're leaving one form of childhood and becoming another category, a whole different kind of animal as an adolescent, leaving elementary school, moving into middle school, in line for confirmation in our tradition, or bar mitzvahs, as was Jesus' tradition. We shrug a lot of the things off that kids say when they're 12, but some of them know exactly what they want to do. Steve Jobs, in his autobiographical book near the end of his life, said that when I was 13 years old, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I was so fascinated with computers that's what I wanted to do. And that's, of course, who he became. And the world is glad and frustrated all at the same time with what he gave to us. Some think about their future. Some know what they want. And that seems to be who Jesus is. What do you say to a 12-year-old who seems to know what they want to do? Do we encourage? Do we discourage? I want to be president. Oh, honey, a whole generation, 200 years worth of women heard, that's just not possible. Do you encourage? Do you discourage? What do we say to 12-year-olds? I mean, Jesus is one thing, right? I mean, that's kind of a whole different category, but can you really set the ball off the table for somebody who has aspirations? Indeed. So I think one of the points that we want to make on a Sunday following Christmas with our children is to be very careful to nurture their dreams, not pat them on the head lightly and say, oh, honey, that sounds like a great hobby, but maybe not a good career. So be careful. That did not happen to me. My parents said, you want to be what? But I was 19 at the time when those things started transpiring. So Jesus, years later, at 12, after the festival, the story tells us that Jesus' parents are headed back. Now, this is kind of unbelievable as a parent. I mean, it's hard to even imagine. This is where the cultural disconnect comes in. They're headed down a well-worn, well-known road down from Jerusalem, heading east into the Jordan Valley, and Jesus stayed behind. They didn't know it, of course. It was a day before they understood that. Maybe he was with Oma and Opa. Maybe he was with, cousin Sully. Maybe it was with, Zan or Uncle, who knows where he was. And it seemed as though they trusted the group that they were traveling with, the whole entourage, as they would have traveled in a group for safety's sake, because it would be some years later when Jesus would tell a story about that exact road that they were taking. A man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho. Remember what happened to the man? Set upon by thieves. Thank you. There's a seminary showing through. Oh, Bible reader. Set upon by thieves. It sets up the whole Good Samaritan story. Jesus knows this road well. Every year they would have taken it. Now that's kind of unusual because it was an obligation of Jewish males to make the pilgrimage to Jerusalem at least one time in their lifetime. But this family makes this pilgrimage every year. Now, this is Nazareth in the north. There's no Amtrak from there. It'd be a big walk, a week's worth of walking, and that's if you're in good shape and you had your Nike boots on, let alone whatever they were wearing on their feet, in a kind of longitude and latitude of like where we're at in terms of the kind of temperature. So you can imagine springtime here, because we have sort of a Mediterranean kind of climate. What's it like in March and April? Toasty warm, isn't it? Not at all. Sometimes, and oftentimes, downright frigid, like this morning. They didn't see it as a burden, obviously. They saw it as something that they wanted to do. They saw this as a break and a delight from their busy lives, that they could go down to the temple and have this experience with their son. And perhaps even this time, he was bar mitzvahed because he's 12. It's about right on time for him. We don't know what happened. But when they leave, they seem to leave without Jesus. Now, that part's a little hard. You'd think you'd check, Martha, Susie, Jimmy, who's the other one? Oh, yeah, Jesus. Is he in the group? But they go on. They just trusted that he was in the group. They went on. They took a day's journey and went on to Jerusalem. And then they get to the question, where's Jesus, honey? Have you seen Jesus here lately? And then they begin a day-long search. Now think, they've already traveled a day, right? And then they search for a day, because the group must have been that big. It must have been an entourage. So they kind of go camel to camel. See Jesus? Jesus with you? Where's Cousin Sully? Is Jesus with you? Finally, they decide, we have to turn around. And then, I don't know who all turns around with them, but they go back to Jerusalem. Now, they've already been a day journey. They've already taken a day to do this, and it says it's 3 days. They go back to Jerusalem, and then they begin their search. They've contacted the FBI, or the local equivalent, and they begin to search for Jesus. And finally, they find him in the temple. Now, I find Jesus' words a little sassy as a dad myself, What? That's my kids say, because I have what, huh, and duh. Those are my 3 sons. If they were here, they'd go, you've always made that joke. Because I would say something and look in the back seat, and that's what they would give me. What? Huh? Yeah. Okay. So they look for it, and they finally find him in the temple, and it really is a remarkable thing. Why did he stay? We don't know, except that he is both listening and questioning and obviously speaking, because everybody who heard him was impressed. Obviously knew something about this. Even if we just strip away the divinity part, this is kind of a remarkable scene for a human being, especially a 12-year-old. Not too often do we confirmation teachers really get amazed by some of the answers, but it does happen from time to time from 12-year-olds who seem to get it. Did he seem to know? Did he know, looking forward, that it would be his cousin, not Sully, but John, that would baptize him in the Jordan? Not really that far away. Did he know that in that city he would travel with 12 disciples and about an entourage of another 120 people when he was much older? Did he know about the moment of transfiguration on the mountain that was on its way back to Galilee? Did he know about the triumphal entry from across that Kidron Valley on that road as it just starts out of Jerusalem? Did he remember that? Did he know that in advance? Did he know that nearby where he was standing of the trauma of crucifixion and not much further away of the resurrection? We don't seem to have that kind of information that he knew. I think he probably knew about as much as aspiring teachers know at 12 about things like tenure and burnout. Or teen athletes know about steroids and stress fractures. Or farmer boys know about deductions and subsidies. He may not have known those finer points. I didn't know much about what it meant to be ordained when I was even 19 years old, about things like heresy or healthy communication systems in family systems called a parish when I thought about the direction of my life. Did you know about the finer points of your career when you were just thinking about it? I doubt it. But I did know that I had a deep passion for it. I did know that I felt as though God had a hand on me in it, and that I wanted to follow him. I didn't know what it meant, and I certainly didn't know that it would mean leaving Ohio to spend my adult life in California. I certainly didn't know about 3 children. I certainly didn't know about a divorce. I didn't know about a springtime called Christine, and I didn't know about you. But God had it in mind, and God put the passion in the heart. And so when a teenager confides in you, I would like to be very cautious about a holy moment that they just let you step into, about what God might be doing in their life. Because God directs not just clergy or diaconal ministers. God directs into your life. What is it that you do? Is it God-directed? In terms of our own theological movement, we believe it is. We believe that God calls people into service, whether it's an electrician or a plumber or an accountant or a teacher or a clergy person. They're all calls. So be mindful and attentive to what that means. Mary and Joseph were attentive. We hear about Mary pondering. We heard it twice in the 2 days. If you were with us on Christmas Eve, Mary ponders there when the shepherds come and they tell out their story about the whole night sky lighting up with the angelic heavenly host and telling them what's going to happen. And they're going to find this baby wrapped in swaddling cloth. He's going to be in a food trough. Can you believe it? And here he is. And it says Mary ponders it. And in this case, when Jesus is 12 years old, Mary hasn't changed much in her character. She's treasuring now. That's the same idea as pondering, isn't it? She's thinking about these things. She's thoughtful. She's remembering. She's writing in her diary about what Jesus did today, about what God is revealing in and through him, the long wait that she has to have until he's 30 years old to see what God's really going to do. And yet she marches faithfully. And so I think some of you that are here today, especially those of you that are here with little kids, because I feel a little blurry this morning myself. In fact, I think my wife had to return home to get my computer bag where all my sermon is. So this may be long, so get ready. So that faithfulness. Think about the people that brought you to church, who introduced you to faith, and their faithfulness. It wasn't much for the world to see, was it? This is a subtle thing oftentimes. Sometimes it felt a little heavy-handed. You know, at my house, you had to go to confirmation, and you had to go to Sunday school. And confirmation, by the way, was 5 years, so feel better about your confirmation program, which is only just a slight 3. I don't know. And yet it's in those small acts. It's in the act of showing up on Christmas Eve in that old stone church in Pemberville, Ohio. It was the act of a pastor being interested in youth and having a youth group pray together. It was the acts of going to what were regional gatherings, I guess, at the time, youth group events and Sunday school classes, and poor Mrs. Hagley, who we definitely put into an early grave, who infected us with faith and hope and love and peace. And even though it seemed like a small thing, and at times we probably mocked it, it made all the difference. That's how God works. Yeah, we like the Christmas story, and I feel bad for people that only come on Christmas Eve because they get the same story. They only get the same little baby Jesus, you know, and the great big show in the sky, and God acting in overhanded ways. But the fact is that God works behind the scene, because this, you know, we don't know anything about these 12 years between the time that Jesus leaves the temple at Mary's purification rite, which we don't get in this reading cycle, to 12, we hear nothing. And from 12 to 30, we know nothing. But I can tell you that every year, their family went from Nazareth in the north down to Judea near Bethlehem, where he was born, to be observant. Small act of faithfulness, almost like a footnote, wasn't it? Every year they went down to the festival. And somehow they get caught in the subtlety of it. Maybe you got caught in the subtlety of it. Do you remember how many days Jesus was missing? What did the text say? 3. It says that he was missing 3 days. They searched for 3 days. Do you know anything else that happened in Jerusalem in 3 days? Sounds an awful lot like Easter, doesn't it? On the 3rd day, he rose from the dead. There's a mirror story that Luke wants us to see about losing Jesus and about what it means to be found by him in small things and in grand things. Mary and Joseph find Jesus alive and well 3 days into their journey in a place that they never expected. That sounds an awful lot like Easter. Yeah, Luke hints here about resurrection. Jesus is dead and buried, as good as gone, as good as lost, raised on the 3rd day. And what Christians claim about his resurrected body is it is the new temple, Jesus' resurrected life. That's why we relocate worship from that place to that person. But it's not the life that we expected. It was a huge surprise. And Jesus just seems to shrug and say, "Didn't you know it all along?" But that's Easter. And for now, it says that Jesus went back with his parents to Nazareth. He disappears back into the fabric of his hometown, into the patterns of a devout, everyday kind of life. And for perhaps 2 more decades, Jesus is out of the way, out of the place. We lose him in history, far removed from the centers of religious power and politics, in the company of ordinary people, just like you and I, trying to celebrate holidays and make our way in the world. And it's here that we hear that Jesus continues to grow in wisdom and in years and in divine and human favor. The good news is that the description of Jesus is a description of, well, pretty much every child of God, that they grow in wisdom and in years and divine and human favor, no matter what our age, because God calls people. Whether you're 12 years old or 72 years old, God longs to speak to your heart and life and move us out into service of other people. We will all grow. We can all grow in wisdom and in years and respond to God's love. In Christ, we should be surprised, and yet expect nothing less. Amen.